So I'm deeply honored to receive this award from Equal Justice Works. What this organization has done to advance social justice by seating generations of public interest lawyers has been remarkable. I benefited immensely from the training and opportunities that EJW gave me, both directly through its own programs at fellows conferences where I received training in media and various other things that I wouldn't have otherwise had any chance to obtain, and also from the education that I received from my host organization, the ACLU Immigrants' Rights Project, where I had the chance to learn from some of the very best litigators in the country. That time really launched my career as an immigrants' rights lawyer, and it cemented for me the belief that I was doing the right thing. And I have to say, 25 years later, I'm absolutely equally firm in that conviction. I have loved every minute of it, every minute of it. But I have to admit, I won't say I've loved every minute of it because of the dramatic improvement that has happened in the field during my time. I mean, read the newspaper, right? Quite the opposite, in fact. Like a slow-motion train wreck or a bad movie. Over the last 25 years, I have seen the Overton window of what is acceptable, right, what's sort of legitimate policy discussion on immigrants' rights issues, just consistently move in an anti-immigrant direction, always farther and farther away from evidence-based, rational decision-making. Until today, where we are today, where Miss Sassy, a cat, allegedly eaten by Haitian refugees, but subsequently discovered alive and well in the basement of her owner's home in Springfield, Ohio, has gotten more attention than virtually all of the thousands of people who have come here just trying to make a better life for themselves and their families. Now, to be fair, what Miss Sassy did is actually pretty remarkable. According to the Wall Street Journal, and I have read these stories, Miss Sassy is a Maine Coon cat. Do people know what that is? Do people here know what that is? Okay, good. For those who may not be familiar, Maine Coon is the largest breed of domesticated house cats in the world. And there's a picture of Miss Sassy in the newspaper. She is huge. She takes up a whole chair by herself. And so you have to wonder, how exactly did this, small mountain lion successfully hide in the basement for 3 days? It was definitely worthy of some attention, but not this much. As Carmen referenced, I've spent much of my career litigating cases to establish a right to appointed counsel for people facing deportation. And 20 years ago, I really thought that this should be an issue on which reasonable people could agree. Whatever you think the rules governing immigration admission and deportation should be, surely we can all agree that those rules should be administered fairly. And you can't have a fair deportation hearing with a prosecutor on one side arguing for deportation, but no one to defend the immigrant on the other. I learned that on my grade school playground. You have to have a level playing field. So we started working toward that goal in the immigrants' rights movement at the ACLU and outside of it about 15 years ago through a class action lawsuit called Franco Gonzalez v. Holder. That case focused on the rights of people with serious mental disorders. Mr. Franco himself had a very severe cognitive impairment. He didn't know his age, he couldn't tell time. The government had sought to deport him for a crime that he committed, but refused to provide him with a lawyer. And the immigration judge, in his first hearing, could tell right away that he didn't understand what was happening. And so she closed his case, took it off the court's calendar until a lawyer could be found, saying, I don't think that this person can have a fair hearing, and so I can't proceed in the hearing as it is. But the government said, well, we have no obligation to find him a lawyer, which was true under the law at that time. And so Mr. Franco spent the next 4.5 years locked up in an immigration jail with no active proceedings against him. And he might have stayed there longer, except that the detention center he was in actually was closing, and then a deportation officer did a review of a whole load of files and found this case, and fortunately contacted a colleague of mine, Talia Inlander, who brought the case to our attention. And through that, Mr. Franco became the lead plaintiff in our class action. And we won. Franco established, as Carmen was saying, a right to free legal representation for people with serious mental disorders facing deportation. And the 2013 injunction from that case remains in place to this day. And last year, thank you. Last year, Mr. Franco himself became a US citizen. It was amazing. We represented him, actually, at the center where I work at UCLA. It was a beautiful, beautiful thing. I should add, multiple EJW fellows spent virtually their whole fellowship working on that case. This organization really deeply invested in it. I savored that victory at the time, really savored it, but I always saw it as a first step. You know, a giant one, bitterly fought and all that, but still just a step. Yet today, more than a decade later, the program established through the Franco injunction and the government's extension of it voluntarily through the whole country, that remains a singular exception to the general rule. For all other immigrants facing deportation, they can get legal representation if they can pay for it. Or if a pro bono organization, like some of the many funded by EJW, is willing to help them, has the capacity to do it, or if a state or local entity funds counsel, as now several do. But otherwise, they're on their own. And most of them are. According to data from the Transactional Records Access Clearinghouse, this past August, 85% of all immigrants ordered removed did not have a lawyer. That includes longtime lawful residents convicted of minor crimes, people fleeing persecution from countries with raging civil wars, and many people jailed in the immigration detention system. It's called that, but it's a prison system. That's what it is. And those people have to fight their cases unrepresented from behind bars. But worst of all in my view, that number also includes children. Even now, after years working on this issue, the claim seems absurd, even as I say it. Can you believe we live in a country where federal immigration prosecutors appear in court against unrepresented children and judges order those children deported? But it's true. It still happens in thousands and thousands of cases every year. In a detailed study we conducted at the Center for Immigration Law and Policy at UCLA, where I am now, we found that nearly 1/3 of all immigration court cases initiated during this administration, more than 80,000 during a 5-month period we analyzed, were against children. The respondent in those cases was a child, somebody under 18, and 30,000 of those children were under the age of 5. Many were part of family units, but many others were unaccompanied. They came here alone, not in the custody of their parents. Most unrepresented, unaccompanied children never even make it to court, a point that one candidate for president has recently exploited, misleadingly calling them lost. They aren't lost, but they have been the victims of a gross miscarriage of justice. In our data set, 86% of the removal orders issued against unaccompanied children were for failing to appear. Think about that for a minute. Under the immigration laws, unrepresented children can be ordered deported because they didn't come to court. I scarcely trust my 8-year-old daughter just to walk across the street. How can you possibly impose life-altering legal consequences on children for failing to appear? But we do, every day. After we won the Franco case, I worked with an extraordinary team of attorneys to try to change that. And we spent 5 years litigating multiple cases, including another large class action, seeking to establish a right to appointed counsel for children facing deportation. And again, this organization, to its credit, I will be forever grateful, invested heavily in those cases with multiple Equal Justice Works fellows working on them. Stephen Kang, actually, who's on a board outside, is one of those, a brilliant attorney at the ACLU who worked on those cases for many years. Some of you may remember the deposition testimony we got in one of them. I asked the assistant chief immigration judge for vulnerable populations when I was taking his deposition. This is a man who trained other judges for a living, how old a child had to be to represent themselves. And he said, and I am quoting from the deposition audio, which we still use to this day, "I've taught immigration law literally to 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds. It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of patience, but they get it." You know, ever since, and particularly since I became a parent, this has given me feelings of deep inadequacy. You know, I mean, I don't want to make anybody here feel too anxious, but like my daughter is 8 and she hasn't even taken the LSAT yet. You know, those statements were mocked in videos that went viral. You can look them up actually on Google right now. They were even ridiculed by senators in Judiciary Committee hearings because there were multiple hearings about this subject. And we used it as a public education tool to raise awareness on the issue, to create more pressure for the government to fund pro bono counsel, which it did. And probably indirectly, I have no doubt, our efforts did help to protect many children from deportation. But what troubles me, eats at me to this day, is that what that judge said effectively remains the position of our government. All that litigation we did never resulted in a ruling on the merits. And the thousands of children who have come here since we first filed the first cases on this in 2014 remain vulnerable to deportation. Many of them have already been deported, but even others who the government lost track of, they're easy targets in any future federal mass deportation campaign, because in theory, they've already had their day in court. They're also targets right now for smaller enforcement operations, for employers looking to exploit vulnerable immigrant workers. So I ask you, can it really be that this is who we are? So I chose to focus my remarks on this issue today for 2 reasons. First, I wanted everyone listening here to know that I and the other attorneys who have worked on issues involving immigrant children have not given up. We have continued, thank you. We've continued to push at all levels of government for a right to counsel, and ultimately for a world in which every proceeding involving an immigrant child is focused on the best interests of the child, which is how it works for children in virtually every other legal context in this country and around the world. Second, and here I'm particularly speaking to some of those in the audience who may be a little bit younger than me, which I'm guessing is a lot of you at this point, people starting their careers through EJW. I want you all to know that although this work has been hard, very hard, I have found tremendous joy in this struggle. And I'm not alone. My partners in it have become some of my closest friends. The fact that we have not won, not yet won, has not weakened our resolve at all. Mahatma Gandhi is someone who has inspired me, and obviously many, many others. I've read a lot of his work, his autobiography and other writings. I always find him really interesting because, he spent decades advocating peacefully and eventually winning one of the greatest struggles for freedom in the history of the world, the decolonization of all of South Asia. And he once said, it's the action, not the fruit of the action, that's important. You have to do the right thing. It may not be in your power, may not be in your time that there will be any fruit, but that does not mean you stop doing what is right. You may never know what results come from your action, but you know if you do nothing, there will be no result. And so I exhort all of you tonight, in the spirit of Equal Justice Works, in whatever kind of work you do, follow your conscience, do what's right. Ultimately, that's where our greatest strength will always, always lie. Thank you very much.